There are places in the jungle where maps don't show and where people never return. We slept next to one of them. The Singing Rocks. I don't know why I'm telling this now, except that the sound has started again. Not as loud as before, not as close, but enough that I can't sit still in my apartment at night without feeling the glass hum on the window panes. You'd call it tinnitus, maybe. I've been told worse. But tinnitus doesn't sound like someone whispering your name from under stone. I used to live for the coast. Malibu, Point Dume, the long sweep of water where the Pacific folds over itself in endless rhythm. Surfing was what kept me steady. I worked nights at a cafe, slept a few hours, then drove down to the beach before dawn, board strapped to my old Volkswagen. Salt already in my hair before I even touched the water. Surfing isn't just riding waves. It's listening. Reading subtle shifts in pressure, watching the surface tighten before a swell rises. You tune yourself to something older than words. It started late that summer when the fog hung heavier than usual. The kind of fog that about swallows light so completely you can't tell where the horizon is. That morning I paddled out past the reef where the locals say the rocks sing. I'd heard the stories before, tales from older surfers about strange acoustics in the cliffs. They said if you sat out long enough, the stone would hum, echoing with the tide. Some claimed the sound could mess with your balance, make you wipe out even on a clean wave. I thought it was just folklore, the kind of thing people repeat to give the ocean more personality than it already has. But when I drifted into still water between sets, I heard it. A low vibration rising through the board into my chest. It wasn't like a boat engine or distant thunder. It was steadier, almost like a long-held note. I told myself it was just the current against the reef, but then it formed into something closer to voice, a moan that stretched and curled, rising from deep in the stone and spilling into the water around me. I froze, paddle dripping salt into my lap. The fog thickened, and for a moment I couldn't see the beach, couldn't see the horizon, just gray walls swallowing the world. That's when I heard it shift. A break in the hum, a rough edge forming syllables. My name, not clear, not human, but so close I nearly tipped my board, scrambling to look behind me. There was no one, only the rolling pulse of the Pacific and that sound inside the rock. I paddled hard, too hard, arms burning as I drove myself toward the outline of shore. When my board hit sand, I stood, legs shaking, chest heaving, and waited for the sound to fade. It didn't. The rocks along the cove shuddered faintly like the ocean had pressed something awake in them. For days after, I told myself it was exhaustion, lack of sleep, a cafe worker living on caffeine and salt water, hearing things that weren't there. But when I went back, because surfers always go back, because one strange morning can't erase years of belonging to the ocean, it returned. The second time, the sound didn't come from the rocks. It came from beneath the water, vibrating up through my board as if the ocean floor itself was hollow, a cavern amplifying voices that shouldn't exist. I held still, breath caught until the moan shifted again. This time it wasn't just my name. It was a call, not words I recognized, but sharp, clipped syllables, each one striking the inside of my skull like stone on stone. I didn't surf. I didn't even try. I turned back immediately, watching the water with the same paranoia you feel walking home in the dark when footsteps fall too close behind you. I stopped telling people I heard it after that. The first friend I mentioned it to laughed, said I was lucky to experience Malibu's natural symphony. Another just nodded, said, "Yeah, those rocks have a way of getting inside your head." Neither looked me in the eye when they said it. That was the first crack. The second came when I started hearing it on land. Walking the cliffside trails at dusk, gulls wheeling overhead, I'd pause and feel the earth beneath my feet buzz, faint but undeniable, like a tuning fork pressed into the soles of my shoes. By then I couldn't sleep without the hum in my ears. Nights were worst. I'd wake thinking I'd heard my name whispered just outside my window, only to find the glass faintly vibrating, as if touched by a note too deep to belong to any instrument. The more I returned to the water, the stronger it grew. and with it came something else. Shadows beneath the surface, not fish, not kelp, not the rolling bodies of seals. Something slower, shapes that stayed still when the waves moved, like dark stone columns reaching up from the seabed. One morning, I paddled out past the fog line, determined to prove it was nothing. Determined to reclaim the rhythm of surfing, the clean break of a wave beneath me. But when I straddled my board and looked down, I saw the sand shift unnaturally, as if the ocean floor itself was breathing. And then I heard the moan again, louder this time, rising not from the cliffs, but directly beneath me. It said my name, clearly. I almost screamed, but the sound strangled itself in my throat, because in the water below, one of the shapes moved. It wasn't the surge of a fish, it wasn't the twist of a seal. It was the slow, deliberate rise of something vast, pulling the current around it. The hum deepened, rattling through my bones, and the rock chorus swelled like a choir of stone voices echoing my name in perfect unison. I didn't paddle back, I fled. Hands blistered on the paddle, lungs burning, board cutting through water that felt suddenly thick, almost viscous, like the ocean was holding me back. I made it to shore and collapsed in the sand, stomach heaving, ears ringing with a sound I could no longer tell apart from my own heartbeat. That was when I knew. The ocean hadn't been calling me by accident. It knew me, and it wasn't finished. I tried to quit. I told myself no more dawn patrols, no more foggy mornings, no more pulling on a wetsuit damp from the day before. I stacked my board in the garage, shoved it behind boxes of tools, let the salt crust stiffen the wax. For weeks, I stayed away from the water, telling myself I'd learn to live without it. But Malibu has a way of pulling you back. The air carries salt even inland. The waves are visible from the highway, glittering blue threads you can't ignore. Friends would call, tell me I was missing perfect swells, glassy mornings with offshore winds. I'd say I was busy, but the truth was worse. I was scared. Scared because the sound hadn't stopped. Even in my apartment, away from the cliffs, I'd hear it at night. A low vibration threading through the floorboards, rising just enough to make the windows quiver. Sometimes I'd catch myself whispering back, just a word, my own name, like testing an echo. And sometimes the echo answered. I stopped sleeping. My coworkers noticed first, said I looked pale, hollow-eyed. I lied about insomnia, about too much caffeine. But one night, when the humming had grown so strong, I swore my teeth were vibrating in my skull. I drove back to the beach, not with my board, just me, barefoot, walking the sand under a thin moon. The tide was low, the rocks exposed like dark ribs cutting through the foam. I stood close enough to smell the brine and kelp, to feel the pull of the sea. And there it was, the sound. Not faint anymore, not hidden under surf or fog, loud, resonant, as if the earth itself was hollow and alive. It wasn't just a hum anymore. It was voices, layered, overlapping, each one pushing against the other in a chorus that pressed into my chest. My name threaded through them, again and again, stretched into shapes my own mouth couldn't make. I stumbled back, ears ringing, and nearly tripped over something in the sand. At first I thought it was driftwood, a sun-bleached branch tangled in kelp, but when I bent closer, I saw it wasn't wood. It was bone, a rib cage half buried, the edges smoothed by tide, human-sized. I dug with my hands, frantic, until the wet sand gave way, a sternum, a skull, empty sockets staring at the cliff line, and in that hollow cavity of bone the sound was loudest. I staggered back, mouth dry, and swore I saw the rocks pulse, stone trembling in rhythm with that chorus as if the cliff itself was breathing. I don't remember running. I don't remember how I got back to the car. I only remember the echo in my chest as I drove, louder with every mile inland until I pulled over and vomited into the ditch. The next morning I told myself it had to be a body washed ashore, some unlucky soul pulled by currents and left in the sand. I checked the news, the missing persons reports, anything that might confirm what I'd seen. Nothing. No body recovered, no mention of bones on the beach. I went back 3 nights later against every instinct. The tide was higher then, the rocks swallowed again, and there was no sign of the bones, just sand smoothed by water as if it had never been disturbed. But the sound was there, stronger. It was changing me. I could feel it in the way my chest vibrated when I breathed, in the way I'd wake with dried salt on my lips though I hadn't gone near the water. In the dreams that came, dreams of standing waist deep in black water while the cliffs rose higher and higher, voices spilling from every crevice, chanting my name in tones that shook the marrow of my bones. Once, in the dream, something surfaced. Not a face, not even a shape I could describe. Just movement that broke the water without breaking the rhythm of the waves. Something that breathed in silence, yet made the rocks sing louder. I stopped trying to convince myself I was imagining it. I knew better. The coast wasn't just geography. It wasn't just cliffs and surf. It was alive, and I had let it notice me. That realization sank deeper when I started seeing others, not people I knew, strangers, standing on the rocks in the fog, still as statues, their outlines barely visible. Once, a figure crouched near the shoreline as I walked by at dusk. I called out, thinking maybe someone had fallen, needed help. They didn't answer. They just turned their heads slowly toward me, and though the fog blurred their features, I swear their mouth moved in perfect time with the humming in my chest. The worst was the morning I couldn't resist the surf any longer. I told myself one wave, just one, to prove I still belonged to the water, and not to fear. The fog was thick, muffling the world into gray. I paddled out, arms weaker than I remembered, balance off. The hum was there, constant now, so loud I felt my vision tremble. And then I heard it not beneath me, not around me, but inside me. A voice that wasn't a voice, shaping itself in the hollows of my skull. It said, "You are ours." The wave rose then, sudden and sharp, a wall of water that should have thrilled me once. I tried to turn to ride it, but my arms locked, my legs dead weight. The board tipped. Salt rushed into my lungs, the sea wrapping me in silence so complete the hum vanished. For a moment, I thought I'd drowned, that I'd finally given the rocks what they wanted. But when I surfaced gasping, coughing foam, the fog had lifted. The beach was empty. I dragged myself onto the sand, collapsed on my back, and felt the vibration again. Not in the cliffs, not in the sea, in me. I haven't been the same since. At first, I thought it was trauma. Drowning does things to you, even near drownings. The body remembers the panic, the lungs remember the burn. But this was different. My skin felt wrong, as if the salt water hadn't washed off, as if it lingered inside me. I'd run my hands over my arms and swear the hairs quivered to a rhythm only I could hear. My teeth hummed faintly when I clenched my jaw. I stayed off the water, but the ocean didn't stay off me. The sound followed me inland, faint at first, then sharper, closer, as though distance no longer mattered. I'd be working a shift at the cafe, steaming milk, when the cups on the counter would rattle in time with that buried chorus. No one else seemed to notice, or maybe they pretended not to. When I looked up, customers stared at me like I'd spoken too loudly. At night, my dreams deepened. I wasn't standing in the surf anymore. I was inside the rock. Darkness pressed in, but it wasn't silence. The walls breathed. Each exhale released that low, ancient tone, and my name threaded through the sound like kelp through tide. Sometimes I'd feel hands, not human hands, but the weight of stone press against my shoulders, guiding me deeper. I'd wake choking, sand in my mouth though I hadn't left my bed. One morning I found pebbles in my sheets, smooth, black, slick with salt. I lived 2 miles from the shore. I started avoiding mirrors. Not because I saw something else in them, but because I saw me. Thinner, hollowed, eyes ringed dark as tide pools. My lips cracked with salt, my skin pale as if bleached by water. And when I pressed my hand to my chest, I felt it, steady, vibrating. Not my heartbeat, something beneath it, something older, patient. That was when I remembered the bone in the sand, the ribcage half buried, the skull staring blind into fog. I told myself I hadn't imagined it. And if I hadn't, then where had it gone? I began searching, quietly, carefully at first, late-night dives into missing persons reports, drownings, surfers lost to riptides. Malibu has its share. The sea takes and doesn't always give back. But the numbers didn't make sense. Too many vanishing without remains. too many names scratched into memory without closure. The pattern was there if you looked closely. Foggy mornings, rocky coves, last seen paddling near the reef. Locals wrote them off as tragedies. I knew better. The rocks were feeding. The thought should have broken me, but instead it made a strange kind of sense. The sound wasn't a random haunting. It was a hunger, one that called by name, wore you down, lured you into its rhythm until you belonged to it. The ocean wasn't just claiming the lost, it was choosing them. And now it had chosen me. I tried to run, packed a bag, locked the door of my apartment, drove inland as far as I could stand, past the sprawl of Los Angeles, past dry hills that smelled of dust instead of salt. But even in the desert, beneath stars hard and bright, I heard it. A faint hum rising through the ground, rattling the glass in my motel window. The sound wasn't weaker, it was stronger because now there was nothing else to cover it. I realized distance didn't matter. I could drive until the ocean was a memory and the rocks still had me. So I went back. Not because I wanted to, but because there was nowhere else. I parked by the cliffs, walked barefoot down the sand, and stood where the tide curled around my ankles. The fog rolled thick, swallowing horizon and shore. The chorus rose immediately. Not faint, not hidden, but overwhelming, pressing into my ribs until it hurt to breathe. My name echoed again, layered and insistent, carved into sound until it no longer sounded like mine at all. The rocks trembled. I swear I saw them move, not crumble, not erode, but shift, as if something inside them pressed outward. Cracks split wet stone, salt water foaming at their edges, and a deeper sound surged from within. It wasn't just calling me anymore. It was answering something in me. I fell to my knees, sand cold beneath me, and for a moment I almost gave in. Almost let the tide drag me under, let the cliffs close around me. There was relief in the thought. To stop resisting. To belong. But I didn't. I crawled back, hands clawing the sand, lungs seizing with each breath. I stumbled to the car, slammed the door, drove with shaking hands until the coast was a smear of gray in the mirror. That was months ago. I haven't surfed since, haven't even touched the water, but the sound hasn't left. It's in my walls, in my bones, in the quiet between each heartbeat. I avoid music because sometimes the hum slips beneath it, twisting the notes into echoes of my name. I don't answer the phone at night because I'm terrified of what might speak on the other end. And sometimes, when I wake in the dark and the glass trembles in the window frame, I think I see them. Figures in the fog, still as stone, waiting for me to return. Because the rocks don't forget, and they don't let go. I can't tell if I'm remembering things wrong now or if the rocks are rewriting me. That's what it feels like memory itself is soft sand, and they keep dragging a wave across it, smoothing and reshaping until I don't trust what's mine anymore. For example, I used to think my father taught me to surf. I could picture him pushing me into my first wave, his laugh echoing across the water, but when I try to summon the memory now, I don't hear him. I hear the hum. The long, low vibration rising as the board caught. His face is gone. The sound replaces it. Another time, I walked into the cafe, late for a shift, salt still drying on my skin, and my coworker said, "Rough morning?" Except when I replay it now, his voice cracks in the middle, and I swear I hear my name stretched inside it, a stone resonance hidden beneath his laugh. It's not just memory. It's sound itself. I thought about seeing a doctor, an audiologist, anyone who could tell me my ears were damaged, that I was hallucinating from lack of sleep. But the idea terrifies me. What if they put their instruments against me and hear it too? What if it's not in my head, but in my bones, in my chest, in the marrow of who I am now? Some nights I test it. I stand in silence, hold my breath, and press my fingers to the drywall. The hum is always there, faint but steady, a current running beneath everything else. And sometimes it hums back when I tap. I've stopped telling people. You learn quickly how to carry silence when the truth is too heavy, but silence doesn't keep them away. A week ago, I drove the coast at night, windows down, trying to clear my head. The air smelled of tarweed and salt, thick with fog. That's when I saw them again. Not just one figure, but three. standing ankle-deep in the tide, their bodies motionless, faces turned toward the cliffs. Their outlines blurred in mist, and though I told myself they were just surfers waiting for a set, I knew better. No one waits at midnight. No one waits without moving, without breathing, without shivering in the cold. The hum thickened in my chest until I could barely keep the wheel steady. I drove faster, heart pounding until the taillights behind me blurred red in the fog. But when I checked the mirror, the road was empty. The next morning, I found wet sand on my doorstep, a thin line, like someone had stood barefoot outside my apartment. That was when I stopped sleeping altogether. I lie awake now, night after night, waiting for the next crack in silence. And it always comes. Sometimes from the window, sometimes from the floorboards, sometimes from deep inside my chest where no hand could ever reach. My name, over and over until it no longer belongs to me. The worst part isn't the sound. It's the certainty. I know they're not done with me. Because last night, I heard something new. Not the hum, not the moan of rock under tide, a click, soft, deliberate, like stone tapping stone. And it came from my closet. I didn't open the door. I couldn't. I lay frozen, staring at the outline of it in the dark, every muscle screaming for me to move. The clicking grew louder, steady as a metronome, until it merged with the hum in my chest. And just before dawn, it stopped. When I finally opened the closet, the clothes were damp. My shoes were half buried in sand. I think I understand now. The ocean doesn't just want me in the water. It wants me hollow, like the cliffs. It wants to sing through me. So if you ever stand on the Malibu coast and the fog closes in and the rocks begin to moan like voices, don't listen. Don't let the sound know your name, because once it does, it won't stop. And one day, when you least expect it, the singing won't come from the rocks at all. It will come from you. I remember the first time I saw it, the way a single glow in the trees can pierce the night like a secret trying to tell itself. It was late September, that in-between season where the air tastes half of summer's dust and half of winter's iron bite, when silence can feel like it's holding its breath just as tightly as you are. I had taken my RV out to a campground in northern Arkansas, tucked deep into the Ozark National Forest. It was one of those places where the gravel roads narrow until you're sure you've taken a wrong turn, that where the trees crowd the sky and swallow every trace of light except for what you bring with you. And I had brought very little. I had been camping solo for years, and by then I thought I understood the rhythm of being out there. The way the forest settles at dusk, the scatter of animal calls, the way wood smoke drifts and clings to your clothes like a memory. I liked that. I liked how being alone in those places stripped you down until the only thing left was honesty, your fear, your strength, your patience. But this trip was different. I didn't know that yet, though. All I knew was that my body was restless, that I needed to get away from people, from my job, from the constant pressure of words and screens and noise. I thought the forest would heal me the way it always had. The campground was half empty when I pulled in. A couple with a pop-up trailer sat 2 sites down, a pair of older men with a fifth wheel across the loop, and me tucked into a site near the tree line where the road bent. It felt private, and I wanted that. My fire pit was ringed with stones, blackened from years of other campers. Behind it stretched a wall of trees, dark even in daylight. I noticed that quiet immediately. Even the insects seemed subdued, their chorus thinner than I expected. It was the kind of quiet you don't question at first, but that slowly grows heavier the longer you sit with it. I lit a fire as the sun dropped, using the bundle of wood I bought at the entrance. The air cooled quickly, and I sat in my camp chair, listening to the forest close in around me. For hours, it was ordinary. The hiss of burning wood, the occasional snap of a twig somewhere in the brush. My phone showed no service, which I welcomed. I wanted the world to forget me. But then, as the fire settled into embers, I noticed something strange. Through the trees, maybe 30 or 40 yards away, there was another light. At first, I thought it was another camper, someone else with a fire just past the tree line. The glow flickered the way fire does, soft and rhythmic, pulsing against the bark of the trees. But there was no sight back there. I remembered the map. They didn't allow camping beyond the loop, and the forest in that direction ran steeply downhill toward a creek. It shouldn't have been possible. I stood, half expecting to hear voices, maybe laughter. Nothing. Just that flicker of orange light. My fire was dying, and the glow beyond the trees seemed too strong, too steady. It unsettled me in a way I couldn't name. I wanted to believe it was nothing. Maybe a hiker who had ignored the rules, maybe a trick of my eyes. But when I stepped toward it, the hair on my arms prickled. Something about it felt wrong. I didn't go far that night. Just a few paces into the tree line, enough to convince myself I was being silly. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. The glow wasn't rising or falling with smoke, wasn't moving with wind. It was just there, a steady burn in the darkness, too bright to be embers, too alive to be reflection. I told myself it didn't matter. I went back to my RV, shut the blinds, and climbed into bed, though sleep didn't come easy. When I woke the next morning, I half expected it all to feel like a dream. But when I stepped outside, my fire pit was cold, ash scattered by the wind, and through the trees in the daylight there was nothing. No sign of coals, no remains of wood, nothing but undergrowth and the steep slope toward the creek. My chest loosened a little. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe fatigue had played tricks on me. I went about the day as planned, hiked a nearby trail, made lunch at my site, read a book in the shade. The forest still felt strange, though. The silence wasn't natural. I'd pause sometimes, realizing I hadn't heard a single bird for hours. Once I thought I heard footsteps on gravel near the entrance to the loop, but when I looked, no one was there. Still, I pushed those thoughts aside. Out here, if you let your mind run too far, you'll talk yourself into shadows. By evening, I was tired. I lit another fire, cooked dinner, and tried to settle into the peace I had come for. But as night thickened, my eyes kept drifting to the same patch of trees. The memory of that glow tugged at me like an unfinished sentence. And when my fire dwindled again, the impossible happened. The other fire came back. It was there exactly where it had been, burning low but constant, with no sound, no smoke. It should have been comforting. Fire meant warmth, life, presence. But instead it felt predatory, like it had been waiting for me. This time, I didn't sit still. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the trees. The forest floor was soft with needles, the air damp with the smell of moss. My beam of light cut across branches and caught on spiderwebs, but no matter how far I walked, the glow stayed the same distance away, as if retreating from me. I stopped, my breath sharp in my chest. Something was wrong. The fire wasn't on the ground. It was hovering, a few feet above it, steady as a lantern. And then I realized it wasn't illuminating anything around it. The trees should have been lit orange, shadows stretching long and sharp, but they weren't. The glow existed alone, burning without touching what surrounded it. I froze. My instincts screamed, but I couldn't move. I stared until my eyes watered, and in that haze I thought I saw movement inside the light. Shapes shifting slowly, like coals rearranging themselves, but with intention. I blinked, and it was gone. Just the glow, steady and waiting. I backed away, step by step, not turning until I was back at my RV. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the small table inside, the blinds drawn tight, every creak of the forest sounding like a footstep at my door. I told myself I'd leave in the morning, that whatever I'd come here to find wasn't worth the price of staying. But when dawn came, exhaustion blurred my judgment. Packing up felt like admitting fear, like giving in. I told myself I was stronger than that I wouldn't let some trick of the light chase me off. And so I stayed. And that was my mistake. The second night was worse. I had convinced myself through the daylight hours that fear was weakness, that the mind invents things in the dark it cannot explain, and that running from those inventions only gives them power. I told myself that the glow had been nothing, perhaps campers who had ignored the rules, or moonlight catching the pale bark of a sycamore, or my tired eyes turning shadows into flames. By the time the sun sank, I almost believed it. But when night returned, it came down hard and fast, a black curtain that swallowed every trace of warmth. The forest was silent in a way that wasn't just absence, but intent, as if every living thing had retreated, leaving me alone with something that had claimed the territory. I lit my fire early, fed it heavy with wood, and tried to drown my nerves in the normal rituals. Boiling water for tea, slicing an apple, the familiar hiss and pop of flames. For a time, it worked. The fire became a companion, its light pushing back what the forest withheld. Yet as midnight neared, the silence thickened, and then it happened again. Through the same tangle of trees, the glow appeared. Not sudden, not explosive, just there as though it had always been and I had only just remembered to look. My chest tightened. My own fire was roaring, wood stacked high, but the glow beyond it shone as steady as if no fuel was required. This time I didn't move. I stayed in my chair, staring through the dark, my body rigid. My mind screamed to pack up, to leave, but another voice, quieter and more dangerous, whispered, "Watch." It felt like a test, though I couldn't say of what. And then I noticed something I hadn't before. The glow wasn't round, wasn't like a campfire at all. It stretched upward, thin at the base, widening toward the top, flickering like a tongue of flame caught in wind that didn't exist. It was too tall, too narrow, unnatural. And inside it, God help me, there was motion. Not smoke, not sparks, but something bending and shifting within, as if shapes were trying to emerge. My throat tightened. My skin prickled with sweat, though the air was cool. I wanted to turn away, to retreat inside, but I couldn't. I was pinned by it, by the quiet certainty that the thing beyond the trees knew I was watching, and that this exchange was not accidental. I don't remember deciding to stand, but suddenly I was on my feet. My fire behind me roared, but I hardly felt its warmth. I took a step toward the tree line, then another. My flashlight was in my hand, though I don't recall picking it up. I lifted it, clicked it on, and aimed the beam toward the glow. The light cut across branches and brush, but when it struck the glow, it did nothing. No reflection, no interference, as though the beam had been swallowed whole. The glow simply remained untouched, steady, alive. And then, as I stood frozen, a sound broke the silence. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even sharp. It was a slow, deliberate knock. 1, 2, 3. The sound of knuckles against wood echoing from the direction of the glow. My stomach dropped. I knew that sound. It was the kind of knock you hear at your front door at night, the kind that freezes every muscle because it carries weight, expectation, demand. In the forest, in that silence, it was unbearable. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking. The glow didn't move. The knocking stopped. I could hear my heartbeat thundering in my ears, louder than the fire behind me. And then, faintly, another sound. A whisper. Not words, not yet, but the cadence of speech, low and guttural, like voices caught underwater. That broke me. I turned and ran back to my RV, slamming the door, locking it, drawing every curtain tight. I sat on the edge of my bed, trembling, the silence inside pressing in just as much as the forest outside. I told myself I was leaving at dawn. No excuses, no pride. But dawn came, and with it a fog so dense the campground dissolved into gray. I stepped outside, clutching my keys, ready to pull out, but the fog stole all sense of direction. I couldn't see the road, couldn't see the other campsites, couldn't even see 10 feet beyond my own RV. Driving blind down those narrow gravel roads felt like suicide. So I waited. Hours passed. The fog thinned only slightly, stubborn as breath on glass. And then to my shock, I realized I wasn't alone. On the gravel loop, half veiled by fog, stood a man. He was tall, wiry, wearing a red flannel shirt and jeans, his posture too straight, his arms at his sides. He wasn't one of the campers I had seen before. His face was pale, blurred by mist, but I could tell he was watching me. Not moving, not waving, just watching. I called out, my voice cracking in the stillness. "Hey, you okay out there?" No answer. I tried again, louder. "You lost?" Nothing, just silence. And then, slowly, the man lifted his hand, not to wave, not to gesture, but to press a single finger to his lips. A motion for silence. And as he did, the fog behind him shifted, and I saw it. The glow burning steady, not 20 yards away, bright even in daylight. I stumbled back, my mouth dry, heart hammering. When I looked again, the man was gone. The fog hung heavy, the road empty. Only the glow remained, waiting. That was the moment I understood. The fire didn't need wood. It didn't need smoke or spark. It fed on something else entirely, on attention, on fear, on the weight of eyes locked to it. And I had given it plenty. I wanted to leave more than anything. But something inside me whispered that leaving wouldn't matter. Not anymore. I had already been seen. I had already been chosen. That night, I didn't light a fire. I sat in the RV, the curtains tight, the silence suffocating. But through every crack, every seam, I felt the glow pressing in. And just before midnight, a sound rose again, muffled through walls but clear as a heartbeat. 1, 2, 3. The knock. This time, it came from my own RV door. The sound froze me in place. I sat at the little dinette, every muscle locked, staring at the door like it might cave inward. 1, 2, 3. Knocks spaced evenly, deliberate, patient. Not the rattle of wind, not the scrape of branches. A hand, flesh on wood. I wanted to shout, to demand who was there, but the words died in my throat. Some instinct deeper than fear told me that answering would be a mistake, that if I acknowledged it, something would cross a line it had been waiting at. So I stayed silent, clutching the edge of the table until my knuckles ached. The knocking stopped. Silence filled the space so heavily I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the cooling stovetop, the blood rushing in my ears. Seconds stretched into minutes. I began to wonder if I had imagined it, if exhaustion had warped sound into terror. And then, creak. The metal steps beneath the RV door groaned. Someone or something was standing on them. I held my breath. The door handle twitched, once, twice, slow and testing, as though whoever stood outside was learning its mechanics. My chest tightened. I had locked it. I knew I had. But the sound of that metal turning felt like it didn't care. "Who's there?" I finally managed, my voice breaking. The silence outside swallowed the words whole. No answer, just the faint scrape of weight shifting on the steps. I thought about calling out to the other campers, but what would I say? That a phantom was at my door? That light itself had been knocking? And besides, the fog was still thick. I doubted anyone would hear me. The handle twitched one more time, then stilled. A long pause. Then, slowly, the weight lifted from the steps. The metal groaned in reverse, silence swelling again. I waited for footsteps, for retreating gravel, but there was nothing, just absence. I don't know how long I sat there frozen. Eventually, exhaustion broke through fear, and I lay down in my bed, fully clothed, every light on, clutching my flashlight like a weapon. I told myself over and over, morning, morning, morning. If I could make it to morning, I would leave. But sleep came anyway, shallow and restless, and with it came dreams. I dreamed I was standing in the forest, the glow pulsing in front of me, taller than before, reaching toward the canopy. Shapes moved inside it, limbs, faces, mouths opening and closing without sound. One figure separated from the rest, stepping forward, skin pale as ash, eyes black pits that seemed to drink the light around them. When it opened its mouth, the knocking sound came out. 1, 2, 3, and then it whispered my name. I woke, gasping, sweat cold on my skin, the RV silent around me. For a moment I thought it had been only a dream, until I smelled it, wood smoke. Strong, fresh, drifting in through vents and cracks, though I hadn't lit a fire. I pulled back the curtain just an inch. Outside, in the clearing of my sight, a fire burned, but it wasn't mine. The fire pit was empty, cold, untouched. The flames burned on bare ground, tall and steady, without wood, without fuel. They lit the trees in sharp relief, shadows bending at wrong angles. And within the fire, I saw them. Figures shifting and twisting, their outlines fluid, their bodies flickering as if made of the flame itself. I dropped the curtain, heart hammering. My first thought was to start the RV and drive. Fog or no fog, road or no road, I couldn't stay. I grabbed the keys, but when I turned them in the ignition, nothing happened, not even a click. The battery was fine, I had driven just the day before, but now, dead. I tried again. Nothing. The smoke seeped stronger, filling the RV with the acrid taste of burning. I coughed, panic rising. I yanked open the door to escape, but outside, the fire wasn't in one place anymore. It circled the RV, 4 or 5 columns of flame burning without source, figures shifting inside each one. They weren't dancing, not moving aimlessly. They were pacing, watching. And then the knocking began again. Not from the door this time. From the walls, the roof, the windows. A chorus of knocks, deliberate and slow, surrounding me. 1, 2, 3. Over and over, circling like a ritual. I fell to the floor, hands over my ears, rocking like a child. The noise drilled into me, not just sound, but vibration, shaking through the frame of the RV, through my bones. My vision blurred. For the first time in years, I prayed. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence. I opened my eyes. The glow outside was gone. The smoke had lifted. My fire pit sat empty, cold. The fog had thinned enough to see the gravel road. Everything looked normal, ordinary, as though nothing had happened. I don't remember packing. I don't remember driving out. I only know that by midday I was back on the main highway, hands white-knuckled on the wheel, eyes flicking to the mirrors every few seconds as though something might follow. For a while, I thought I'd escaped, that whatever I'd seen or imagined had been left behind in those trees. But escape, I would learn, is never that simple. Because a week later, parked safely in my driveway at home, I woke in the middle of the night to silence. No crickets, no dogs barking down the street, no hum of electricity, just stillness. And then, faint but deliberate, from the side of the RV parked beside my house, 1, 2, 3, the knock. I didn't move at first. I just lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, telling myself I hadn't heard it, that the sound was in my head, that nightmares had followed me out of the forest and into my own home. But the silence afterward was worse than the knock itself. It had that same weight, that same waiting quality, as though something stood just outside, patient, knowing I was listening. I told myself not to check, but denial only stretched the fear thinner until it threatened to snap. I slipped out of bed, my legs trembling, and crept to the window that overlooked the driveway. The blinds rattled as I lifted one corner. There it was. My RV sat quiet in the moonlight, its white siding glowing faintly, the windshield reflecting the pale sky. Nothing unusual, but in the reflection of the glass, I swear to God I saw it, something flickered. A glow, faint, pulsing, as if firelight were burning inside the vehicle, though I knew it was empty, locked, cold. And then, clear as day, the sound came again. 1, 2, 3, knuckles on aluminum, this time from the side closest to the house, just feet from where I stood. I let the blind fall shut, stumbling backward, pressing my hands to my ears. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but what would I say? That my camper was haunted by a fire that burned without fuel? That light itself had followed me home? The thought of explaining it out loud made me feel insane. So I did nothing. I sat in the dark living room, waiting for dawn, waiting for the world to shift back into something that made sense. When morning finally came, I went outside. The RV sat quietly in the drive. No marks, no smoke, no sign of anything. I opened the door, half expecting to be met with heat, with scorched upholstery, with ashes, but inside, everything was just as I'd left it. Neat, cold, ordinary. I told myself it was over, that it had been stress, exhaustion, a hallucination born from too many sleepless nights. I left the RV locked and walked away from it, determined not to give it my attention. But attention, I would learn, wasn't mine to withhold. Over the next days, small things began to change. At night, when I tried to sleep, the hum of appliances would cut out for minutes at a time, leaving the house drenched in silence, so deep I could hear my pulse in my teeth. Shadows seemed sharper, longer, bending at wrong angles as if they belonged to objects not really there. And then there were the smells, the faint sting of wood smoke drifting through the vents, the acrid bite of ash when I opened the refrigerator, the smell of something burned in places where nothing had been cooked. It followed me from room to room, stronger near the windows that faced the driveway. One evening, I caught myself staring at the RV from the kitchen window, frozen in place. Its white surface seemed to pulse faintly, as though light were moving inside it. I blinked, and it was gone. But the longer I stared, the more I felt it staring back. I decided to get rid of it, sell it, scrap it, anything. I put up an ad online, listing it cheap, almost desperate. Within a day, I had a buyer lined up. Some young couple planning a cross-country trip, their voices bright with excitement over the phone. I didn't tell them about the fire. I didn't tell them about the knocking. I just wanted it gone. The night before they were scheduled to come pick it up, I woke again to silence. My clock read 3:11 a.m. The world outside the window was still, not a leaf stirring. And then it came. 1, 2, 3. Not from the RV this time, from inside the house. I shot upright, heart in my throat. The sound had come from the hallway, from the wall just outside my bedroom. Before I could even process it, it came again. 1, 2, 3. Slower this time, deliberate like a taunt. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and crept into the hall. The beam cut across family photos, the rug, the front door. Everything was still, but halfway down the hallway, against the far wall, something glowed faintly. A smear of orange light, pulsing like breath. I froze. The light stretched, rising upward, thin at the base, widening at the top. Just like in the forest, just like between the trees. And inside it, shapes began to move. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight, retreating into my bedroom and slamming the door. The knocking came again immediately. Not from the hallway, but from the bedroom window. 3 hard raps that rattled the glass. I screamed, pressing myself into the corner, the beam shaking wildly. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. No glow, no sound, nothing but my ragged breathing and the echo of panic in my chest. The next morning, I called the buyers and canceled. I couldn't sell it, couldn't let someone else inherit this thing. It wasn't just tied to the RV anymore, it was tied to me. That was the moment I understood something I had been denying since the first night. This wasn't random. This wasn't just some anomaly of nature. The fire wasn't a trick of the eyes or some unexplained phenomenon of the forest. It was intelligent, it chose, and it had chosen me. In the days that followed, my life unraveled piece by piece. I stopped sleeping more than an hour or 2 at a time. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't hold a conversation without my mind flickering back to the glow I saw in every reflective surface, in every shadowed corner. I stopped answering calls, stopped opening mail. The world narrowed until it was only me and the thing that would not leave. I thought about returning to the forest, about confronting it where it began. Maybe it wanted me back there. Maybe that was the only way to end it. But another part of me feared that if I returned, I wouldn't come out again, that the forest was where it lived, where it drew its strength, and stepping into its domain would be surrender. So I stayed. And every night, without fail, the knocking came. Sometimes from the RV, sometimes from the walls, sometimes from the inside of the closet or beneath the floorboards or right by my headboard as I lay in bed. Always 3 knocks, always deliberate. Always waiting for me to respond. And God help me, sometimes I almost did. Sometimes the silence afterward pressed so hard I found myself whispering back just to break it. But I never did, because deep down, I knew the truth. The moment I answered, really answered, something would open. A door that couldn't be closed again. It's strange, the way you can get used to fear if it happens often enough. At first, every knock had sent me spiraling, adrenaline, sweat, the urge to run. But after weeks of it, a numbness settled in. Fear became the background noise of my life, as constant as the hum of an air conditioner. The knocks weren't surprises anymore. They were punctuation marks in the silence. Predictable, rhythmic, ritualistic. What changed was me. I began to notice patterns. The knocks didn't happen at random. They came only when I was still, when my body had given in to fatigue. Never in the middle of chores, never while I was talking out loud to myself, never while I was pacing the rooms. They came in the quiet, when I was most open, most vulnerable. And the glow, though faint and inconsistent, always followed the same shape. Thin at the base, wide at the top, a kind of funnel, or maybe a doorway. And the things I saw inside it, those shifting figures, weren't random either. They grew clearer with each passing night. Faces, torsos, hands pressed against something invisible, straining toward me but never breaking through. I started keeping notes, scribbles on the back of envelopes and grocery receipts. Times, locations, descriptions. It was the only way I could make sense of it, the only way I could prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. But the notes made something else clear, something I didn't want to admit. The knocks were getting closer. At first, they came from the RV, then the walls of the house, then the hallway, then my bedroom. Each step closer to where I slept, to where my guard was lowest. It was advancing slowly, deliberately, like a hunter wearing down prey. And then one night, I made the mistake of listening too closely. I'd been sitting in the living room, lights off, waiting for it. I don't know why. Maybe I thought that if I faced it on my terms, I'd take back some control. Midnight came and went. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of smoke. My skin prickled with the static of anticipation. And then, knock, knock, knock. But this time, after the knocks, there was something else. A voice, faint, muffled, but unmistakable. It came from the direction of the RV outside, seeping through the glass like breath through fabric. I held my own breath, straining to catch it. It wasn't English. Not exactly. The syllables were warped, guttural, bending in ways my ears resisted. But beneath the distortion, I could hear the cadence of something human. A call, a beckoning. And in the space between the words, I heard something worse, my name. I staggered back, heart racing, bile rising in my throat. Hearing your own name spoken by something you cannot see, it does something to you. It strips you of all pretense, all rationalizations. This wasn't my imagination. It wasn't fatigue. It knew me. That was when I broke. I tore open my laptop, hands shaking, and dove into every forum, every archive, every scrap of folklore I could find. I searched for stories of fires that burned without fuel, of knocks in the night, of glows in the forest. Hours bled into days. My job, my friends, my life. All of it fell away. I lived only for the hunt for answers, and slowly fragments began to emerge. Accounts of travelers in the Appalachian foothills who spoke of watchfires that appeared in the woods, fires that never smoked, that never spread, that never needed wood. Stories of miners in the 1800s who claimed lights flickered in abandoned shafts, drawing men deeper until they disappeared. Old Cherokee legends about a flame that was not flame at all, but a spirit, a messenger between worlds, luring the curious until they joined its ranks. The names differed: corpse fires, will-o'-the-wisps, the hollow flame. But the details matched. A light that wasn't a light. A fire that wasn't a fire, knocking that demanded acknowledgement, whispers that carried the weight of the dead. And one detail chilled me most of all. Every story agreed that once you saw it, truly saw it, it never let you go. I sat in the glow of my computer screen, numb, realizing the truth. This wasn't a haunting. It wasn't tied to the RV or the forest or my house. It was tied to me. The moment I stepped toward it in those woods, the moment I gave it my attention, I opened a door I couldn't close. That night, when the knocking came again, I didn't hide. I stood in the hallway, face to face with the glow that had begun bleeding through the wall like liquid light. Shapes writhed within it, clearer than ever, their mouths opening and closing in silent screams. And then one of them pressed forward, its face emerging from the surface of the glow, pale, featureless, but for hollow eyes and a mouth stretched impossibly wide. And in a voice that was both hundreds of voices and none at all, it whispered, "Come back." I staggered back, choking on air. The word rattled in my bones, echoing long after the glow faded. Come back. Back to the forest. Back to where it began. The message was clear. It wanted me to return. For the first time, I considered obeying, because if this thing would never leave me, maybe the only way to end it was to go back to where it started. To face it on its own ground, to walk willingly into the glow instead of waiting for it to seep through the walls of my life. But another thought gnawed at me. What if that was exactly what it wanted? What if returning wasn't an escape, but a surrender? I didn't know. All I knew was that the fire was patient, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could be. The question sat with me for days. Return or resist? stay here and let it wear me down, or go back and face it on its own ground. Each night the knocking came closer, more insistent, and each night my resolve weakened. The glow bled further into the walls. Sharper now, no longer a haze but a defined shape, a door waiting to be opened. I was unraveling, caught between dread and a twisted curiosity that felt less like my own and more like something the fire had planted in me. In the end, it wasn't courage that decided for me. It was exhaustion. I packed in silence one gray morning, throwing a duffel bag into the RV without looking too long at its white siding, afraid I'd see something moving in the reflection. I didn't plan carefully, didn't write notes for anyone, didn't even lock the house behind me. I just drove. Back to Arkansas. Back to the Ozark forest where the road narrowed and the trees leaned close like witnesses. The entire way there, I didn't turn on the radio. The silence inside the cab was already heavy enough. The farther I drove, the more a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't peace. It was resignation, like walking toward a storm you know will take you under. When I finally reached the campground, the place looked different, emptier. The sights I remembered, the couple with the pop-up, the men with the fifth wheel, all gone. The loop was deserted. Grass had begun to creep across some of the gravel pads as if no one had stayed there in weeks. My old site was still open, the fire pit ring of stones blackened and waiting. I parked. I sat in the driver's seat for nearly an hour, staring at the trees. It was midday, sunlight slanting through the branches, but the forest looked darker than it should have. Heavy, expectant. I told myself to wait for night, to let it come to me, but that voice inside, the one that wasn't entirely mine anymore, pushed me forward. So I walked. I left the RV behind, stepped off the gravel loop, and made my way toward the creek. The undergrowth clutched at my legs, damp and cool, the air smelling of moss and something faintly metallic, like blood left in the sun. Every step felt both foreign and inevitable. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. My own breath grew loud, unnatural. And then I saw it. The glow. Not faint, not distant, right there, 30 feet ahead, pulsing steadily between the trees. It rose taller than I remembered, a column of light stretching upward, bending against the branches without burning them. My stomach dropped. My knees trembled, but I kept walking. The closer I came, the clearer the shapes inside became. Faces, dozens of them, pressing forward, mouths open, eyes black. Hands long and thin, reaching outward but never breaking the surface. They writhed like souls caught in amber, desperate to escape but bound by some unseen barrier. I stopped just outside the reach of its light. My skin prickled, my vision blurred at the edges, but my body wouldn't move any closer. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, every instinct screaming to step back, even as something whispered to jump. And then from deep within the glow, a figure stepped forward. Not a shadow, not a distortion, clear, distinct. A man in a red flannel shirt, jeans, posture rigid. The same figure I had seen in the fog that morning at the campground. His face was pale, eyes hollow, mouth stretched in a grimace that wasn't quite a smile. He raised a hand, slowly, and tapped the air between us. 1, 2, 3, the knock. But this time it wasn't against wood or glass. It was against the boundary itself, the thin membrane between worlds. Each knock rippled the glow like water, the shapes inside thrashing harder, faces twisting in silent screams. And then the man spoke. Come. His voice wasn't sound, it was vibration, running through the ground, through my chest, through the air in my lungs. One word, but it carried all the weight of inevitability. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to, but my legs didn't move. My body leaned forward like a puppet pulled by strings. The air grew hotter, the smell of smoke filling my nose, my eyes watering. I felt the glow pulling me, the shapes inside reaching, the fire burning without heat, without fuel, feeding on me. I dropped to my knees, gasping. What do you want from me? The figure tilted its head, expression empty. And then in a chorus of voices layered over each other, male, female, young, old, it answered. Witness. The ground shook. The glow flared brighter, so bright it painted every tree in searing orange, shadows stretching and snapping in impossible directions. I threw my hands over my eyes, but the light burned through them. searing straight into me. And then I saw. Not with my eyes. Those were shut tight, but with something deeper. Images poured into me, faster than I could process. Faces of others who had stood where I was standing, 100, 1,000, through centuries. Travelers, wanderers, outcasts. Each one drawn to the glow, each one consumed by it. Their lives folded into the fire, their souls trapped inside, fuel for a flame that burned without wood, without end. I saw their despair, their surrender, their final moments as the light stripped them of form, of identity, until all that remained was motion inside the glow, mouths open in silent testimony. Witnesses, that was what they had become. Not ghosts, not lost souls. Witnesses to something that had no name, no beginning, no end. And now it wanted me to join them. The pressure built, dragging me forward, inch by inch. My hands dug into the earth, fingernails tearing against roots, but my body slid toward the glow like metal drawn to a magnet. My scream tore from my throat, lost in the chorus of voices rising from inside the fire. And then something broke. A sound, sharp and jarring, cutting through the pull. My own voice, desperate and furious, shouting against the weight. No. It wasn't defiance, not really. It was survival. Pure animal instinct. The kind of refusal that comes not from strength, but from the part of you that clings to life no matter how hopeless. The glow faltered. Just slightly, but enough. The pull lessened. The figure inside cocked its head, almost curious. And in that split second, I scrambled to my feet and ran. Branches tore at my arms, roots tripped my steps, but I didn't stop. The glow flared behind me, the chorus rising, the knocking pounding inside my skull. 1, 2, 3. Over and over, faster and louder, chasing me through the forest, I burst into the clearing of the campground, gasping, my lungs on fire. The RV loomed in the dark, its white siding glowing faintly with reflected light. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, locked it, and collapsed on the floor. Silence fell. I lay there trembling, waiting for the knocks, waiting for the glow to seep through the walls, waiting for the fire to claim me. But nothing came, only the steady hum of the refrigerator, the creak of cooling metal, ordinary sounds. For the first time in weeks, the world was quiet. And I didn't know if that was mercy or the beginning of something worse. The silence clung to me like a damp blanket. For minutes, maybe longer, I didn't move. My chest rose and fell in ragged gasps, each breath scraping my throat raw. I waited for the pounding on the door, on the glass, on my skull, but none came. Just the ordinary hum of a refrigerator, the faint ticking of the cooling engine. I wanted to believe I was safe. I wanted to believe I'd left it behind in the trees. But safety is a fragile thing once you've seen what I'd seen. The quiet wasn't peace. It was pause. I pulled myself onto the couch and sat there trembling, staring at the door, half expecting it to buckle inward any second. My clothes stank of smoke, though I hadn't touched a fire. My hands were caked with dirt, streaked with blood from torn nails. And my head felt crowded, like I wasn't the only one inside it anymore. When sleep finally came, it wasn't rest. I dreamed of faces pressed against glass, of mouths opening in unison to whisper that same word, witness. I dreamed of the figure in flannel walking steadily toward me, knocking against the invisible barrier, patient, tireless. I woke to dawn light slanting through the blinds, sweat soaking my shirt. The air inside the RV felt too still, too heavy. My first thought was to leave, drive until the tank ran dry, until I collapsed on some distant road where the forest couldn't follow. But another thought, quieter and more dangerous, whispered back, "It's already with you." That morning, I tried to convince myself otherwise. I brewed coffee, burned my tongue on the first sip, forced myself to eat a granola bar. Normal things. But every sound, the crack of a branch outside, the hiss of the propane burner, felt sharpened, charged, like the forest was leaning against the thin walls, listening. I decided to move. I couldn't stay parked on that loop another night. I didn't care where I went, so long as it was away. The tires crunched over gravel as I eased out of the campground. My rearview mirror caught one last glimpse of the site. Fire pit, empty pad, trees leaning close. Nothing unusual, But I didn't exhale until the sign for the highway appeared. For hours I drove. No destination, just distance. My knuckles ached from how tightly I gripped the wheel. Fields and towns blurred past, places that should have felt ordinary but didn't, because the silence came with me. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was the presence of something beneath it. An undertone, a hum. Every once in a while, when the road was empty and the air still, I swore I could hear the faintest rhythm hiding in the drone of the tires. 1, 2, 3. I turned the radio on full blast to drown it out. Static, music, voices, anything to cover the sound. But no matter what station I landed on, no matter how loud, the pattern found its way through. 3 dull thuds buried in every beat. By the time night fell, my nerves were unraveling. I pulled into a rest area off the interstate, one of those lonely stops where the lights buzz overhead and the bathrooms smell of bleach and mildew. I parked at the far end, away from the few trucks idling there. For a long while, I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel, staring at the concrete picnic tables lined up in the yellow glow. I told myself I'd just rest for a bit, just long enough to close my eyes. But when I finally shut them, the knocking returned. Clear this time, not buried in noise. 1, 2, 3. I jolted upright. The RV was dark, the windows reflecting only my own face. My heart hammered. I held my breath, listening. And then, there it was. A second knock, louder, against the door. I didn't move. The third came harder, rattling the thin metal. I forced myself to peek through the blinds. The lot outside was empty. No trucks, no cars, just my RV under buzzing lights. The knock came again. I pressed my back against the wall, whispering, "You can't come in." But even as I said it, a sick certainty gnawed at me. It didn't need to come in. It already had. That night was a blur of fear. I don't remember sleeping. I don't remember eating. I only remember the knocks, always 3, sometimes from the door, sometimes from the walls, sometimes from inside the cabinets. Each one steady, patient, as if reminding me, "We are here. You are seen." By dawn, I couldn't take it anymore. I started the engine and drove until my eyes blurred with exhaustion. I didn't care about direction, didn't care about fuel. I just drove. But no matter how far the miles stretched, the knocks followed. Days passed like that. Highways, gas stations, like empty nights in forgotten lots. Each place different, but the same silence rode with me. The same rhythm waited when the world grew still. I began to wonder if the glow had ever been tied to that forest at all. Maybe it wasn't a place. Maybe it was a condition, a contagion. A fire that didn't spread through wood or grass, but through people, through those who witnessed. If that was true, then I hadn't escaped anything. I'd only become its next carrier. The thought nearly broke me, but somewhere deep down, buried under the exhaustion and fear, another thought surfaced. If the fire wanted witnesses, then maybe, just maybe, resisting it, refusing it, mattered. Maybe the act of saying no carried weight. I'd done it once, on my knees in the dirt, screaming at the glow, and it had faltered. So I made a choice. I couldn't outrun it, I couldn't fight it, but I could deny it. That night, parked beneath the flickering lights of another empty rest stop, I sat at the small RV table with a notebook in front of me. My hands shook as I opened to the first blank page, and I began to write. Not because I thought words could stop it, not because I believed anyone would even read them, but because refusing to carry its silence alone felt like defiance. If it wanted me to witness, then I would, but on my terms, in ink, not in fire. The knocks came while I wrote. Steady, patient. 1, 2, 3. Each one reverberated through the walls, through my bones. But I kept the pen moving, forcing my story onto paper. I wrote about the glow, the faces, the figure in flannel, the word that echoed still. Witness. And with every line I laid down, the knocks grew fainter. Not gone, never gone, but less. As if the fire itself leaned in to listen. By the time the sky outside began to pale with dawn, I realized my hand had stopped trembling. The silence was still there, it always would be. But so was the sound of my pen scratching across paper. And for the first time since that night in the forest, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't only surviving. I was resisting. The first thing I noticed after setting the pen down was the silence. Not the unnatural, pressing kind that had stalked me since the forest, but something quieter, something almost ordinary. For a moment, I just sat there staring at the page, my hand cramped and aching, words scrawled across lines in messy, uneven strokes. The story was ugly, raw, but it was mine. I half expected the knocks to come again, punishing me for my defiance. But none came. Only the low hum of the fridge, the faint chirp of birds outside in the dawn light, and yet the reprieve didn't comfort me. If anything, it unsettled me more. Because silence from it didn't mean absence. It meant it was waiting. I left the rest stop early, too tired to think straight, but too restless to stay. The interstate stretched out like a gray ribbon beneath the wheels, endless miles of asphalt disappearing into the horizon. Every so often, I'd glance at the passenger seat where the notebook sat, its weight disproportionate to its size. I couldn't shake the feeling that by writing, I hadn't weakened the thing. I'd given it a foothold, a new channel. Still, I kept writing. Every evening, no matter where I parked, I forced myself to sit at that little table and bleed words onto the page. The first night I wrote about the glow, the second about the faces in the firelight, the third about the figure in flannel, the way his eyes had reflected something inhuman. The knocks never fully stopped, but they changed. They no longer came with the same insistence. Sometimes I'd hear them faintly, like echoes from another room. Sometimes they came from the floor beneath me or the roof above, but always when my pen was moving, they seemed distracted, almost as if the act of writing fed it. The more I wrote, the more the notebook changed. At first, it was subtle. Pages that should have been blank seemed faintly smudged, as if someone had pressed charcoal fingers across them before I turned to write. Words I swore I hadn't written appeared in the margins. Short, broken phrases like, "We see you and keep going." One night, after hours of pouring out memory until my hand throbbed, I flipped back through earlier pages only to find entire paragraphs altered. Sentences I remembered crafting carefully now twisted into something darker, as though the story itself had rewritten me. That was when I started to realize the truth. The fire didn't want witnesses. It wanted authors. It didn't just want to be seen. It wanted to be told, retold, spread, passed like a torch through words, through stories, until it lived in the minds of anyone who read them. And here I was, its perfect vessel, a man isolated, exhausted, haunted enough to keep scratching its gospel into paper. The realization should have broken me, and maybe a part of me did break right then. But another part, the stubborn, angry core of me, latched onto something else. If it needed me, then maybe I wasn't powerless. Maybe, for the first time since that night in the forest, I held some leverage. So I tested it. That evening, when the knocks began, faint but steady, I set the pen down and folded my arms. "Not tonight," I said aloud. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. "You don't get a word out of me tonight." The knocks grew louder. 1, 2, 3. I clenched my jaw and turned my back on the notebook. The knocks followed me. Walls, cabinets, even the floor beneath my feet. They shook the RV until I thought the bolts would rattle loose. Still, I didn't write. Eventually, the noise died down. The silence pressed heavy, suffocating. But I held on. The next morning, when I opened the notebook, the page I'd left blank the night before was no longer blank. In the faint gray light of dawn, I saw words scrawled across it in jagged script that wasn't mine. "You are not author. You are page." I slammed the book shut. My hands wouldn't stop shaking for hours. From then on, every mile I drove felt heavier. Every rest stop felt emptier. The RV, once a shelter, had become a cage. The notebook sat on the table like a ticking bomb, daring me to open it again. And yet, I couldn't stop myself. By the fifth night, I was writing again. Not because I wanted to, but because something inside me cracked when I tried to resist. A tension built in my chest, unbearable, until the only release was ink on paper. The words poured out faster than before, messy and frantic. But this time I tried something different. Instead of recording what I'd seen, I began to invent. I wrote about the glow fading, about the faces retreating, about the fire collapsing inward until nothing but cold ash remained. The knocks stopped. For a fleeting moment, I thought I'd won. I thought maybe I could write the thing out of existence, smother it under fiction. But when I flipped back through the pages, my story had already been changed. The glow didn't fade, it grew brighter. The faces didn't retreat. They spread, multiplying, filling the forest and spilling into campgrounds, towns, highways. The fire didn't die, it consumed. And beneath my rewritten sentences, faint but unmistakable, another phrase had appeared: we do not end, we spread. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the table with the notebook closed, staring at it like it might open its own cover and swallow me whole. And for the first time, I wondered if the fire wasn't just haunting me. Maybe it was using me, not just to witness, not just to tell, but to deliver. What if every word I wrote wasn't just mine anymore? What if, by putting this story on paper, I wasn't resisting it at all? I was carrying it forward, passing it into the hands, the eyes, the minds of whoever might read it? The thought hollowed me out, because if that was true, then maybe there was no escaping it. Maybe the fire had already spread further than I could imagine. And maybe, by continuing to write these words, I'm not warning you. Maybe I'm handing you the match. I didn't drive the next day. I didn't move at all. The RV sat parked on the edge of a service road off the interstate, hidden behind a cluster of pines. The sun tracked slowly across the windshield, hours bleeding into each other. But I stayed frozen at the table, staring at the notebook as though it were breathing. Every part of me wanted to throw it out, open the door, toss it into the ditch, and peel out onto the highway until I couldn't see the trees behind me. But the thought never lasted. Some other force, cold and patient, wrapped itself around my chest every time my hand twitched toward the door. I realized it wasn't the book holding me. It was the story inside it. That was when the faces began to return. Not outside the RV this time. Not pressed against the windows or flickering in the reflection of the glass. They came from memory, from the inside. I'd shut my eyes, hoping for rest, and instead see them glowing in the tree line, their mouths moving soundlessly, their eyes filled with fire. Each time I woke gasping, the notebook sat a little closer, even if I remembered leaving it across the table. By the second night, I found it lying open on the bed beside me. I knew then what it wanted. It didn't just want my words, it wanted me gone, hollowed out until there was nothing left but the story. That was when I tried burning it. I took the notebook out into the pines after midnight, shivering in the damp night air, clutching a lighter in my free hand. The wind barely stirred. The world felt still, as though the forest itself was waiting for me to strike the flame. I knelt, flicked the lighter, and pressed the fire to the corner of the paper. The page curled instantly, blackening at the edges. The smell of scorched ink filled my nostrils. But just as the flame should have taken, it went out, snuffed as though invisible fingers pinched it clean. I tried again and again, shaking now, sweat dripping down my neck despite the chill. Each time the flame caught, it fizzled before reaching the words. Not a mark remained. By the fourth attempt, the lighter slipped from my hands. I fell to my knees, clutching the notebook, tears burning behind my eyes. "You win," I whispered. "You win. Damn it." That's when the whispers started. At first, they came soft, like wind through dry grass. But the longer I held the notebook, the clearer they became. Voices, not one but dozens, maybe hundreds, all speaking at once. Some pleaded, some screamed. Some only muttered broken fragments, endless loops of phrases. Don't look, don't stay, don't burn, don't burn, don't burn. And threaded through all of them, steady and calm, was another voice. A voice I recognized. The man in the flannel. "You've written it well," he said, clear as though he stood right beside me. "Better than most." I staggered back, clutching the notebook to my chest. My eyes searched the tree line, half expecting to see his silhouette glowing among the pines. But the forest was empty. "You can't destroy it," he continued. "It isn't meant to end. It's meant to spread, to pass from one to the next, like ember to ember, until the whole forest burns. Why me? My voice cracked. Why not someone else? Why not? You were there, he said simply. You saw it. That makes you witness. Witness makes you vessel. Vessel makes you flame. The whispers swelled around his words, rising into a dizzying chorus. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound came from inside. I don't remember stumbling back to the RV. I don't remember collapsing into the bed with the notebook still pressed to my chest. All I remember is waking at dawn, shaking, with the notebook lying open beside me, a fresh line scrawled across the page. We do not die in fire. We live in story. The days since have blurred together. I no longer measure time by miles driven or meals eaten, but by pages written. The RV has become a cage of paper and ink. My hand aches constantly, but I can't stop. Because every time I try, the whispers rise, the faces return, the knocking shakes the walls, and each night when I finish, new words appear below mine. Not written in my hand, not in any hand I know, just words, expanding, spreading, filling the page like ivy choking a wall. I thought once about leaving the notebook in a library or a diner booth, slipping away and letting someone else find it. But the thought twisted my gut in a way that felt like betrayal. Not of myself, but of whoever would pick it up next. Because I know what would happen. They'd read. And once you've read, you can't unsee. The glow lives in you, just as it lives in me. And maybe that's why I'm still writing this now. Not to destroy it, not even to escape it, but because some small part of me believes that if I finish, if I tell the whole story from beginning to end, maybe it won't need me anymore. Maybe it will move on. Maybe you'll carry it instead. And maybe when the knocking comes at your window, when the glow spills through your curtains, when the fire that doesn't burn finds you in the dark, you'll understand what I mean. I don't remember deciding to drive again, but one morning I found myself on the road. The notebook sat in the passenger seat, seatbelt buckled across it like a child. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, but my hands kept the wheels steady, mile after mile of cracked highway stretching beneath the tires. The voices had quieted. For the first time in weeks, the RV felt still. No knocking at the walls, no faces in the glass, just silence. It should have been a relief. Instead, it terrified me, because silence meant they were waiting. The highway bent north, cutting through a region of old coal towns and hollowed-out farms. I passed rusting barns leaning into the fields, dead cars sunken in tall grass, storefronts with boarded windows. Each mile felt abandoned, as though the world had emptied out ahead of me. I told myself I was driving toward something. Toward help, maybe. Or at least toward people. Toward some voice that didn't belong to the fire. But deep down, I knew I wasn't choosing the direction. The notebook was. Every time I glanced at it, a new line of writing had appeared. Short directions, almost like commands. Keep going north. Don't stop at the light. Take the left when the sign is gone. I obeyed without hesitation. My foot pressed the accelerator before my brain had even caught up. By dusk, I was deep in the mountains. The road thinned to 2 cracked lanes, switchbacking through cliffs. Pines crowded the edges, black shapes blotting out the last of the sun. That's when I saw the smoke. It curled above the ridge ahead, faint but steady, the unmistakable rise of a campfire. My stomach turned. Every nerve in me screamed to stop, to turn around, to drive until the gas tank bled dry. But my hands didn't move. The wheel stayed locked toward the fire. Minutes later, I rolled into a clearing. 3 RVs sat arranged in a loose circle, their paint faded, their tires half sunk into the dirt. Camp chairs surrounded the fire pit at the center, where flames licked high into the air. And yet, as soon as I stepped from my RV, I realized it wasn't wood fueling the blaze. The fire burned clean. Too clean. No smoke, except the thin thread I'd seen from the road. No crackle of sap or split wood. Just steady, silent flames licking upward like liquid light. The camp chairs weren't empty. Figures sat in each one, hunched and silent. Faces turned toward the fire, their features slack and blank, eyes reflecting the orange glow. I froze. My breath hitched in my chest. For a long moment, I thought they were mannequins, wax figures, But then one of them twitched, just slightly, a tremor through the hand resting on the armrest. They were alive, or at least they had been. I whispered, "Hello?" No response, not even a blink. My voice felt like an intrusion, a ripple against the silence. The flames swelled briefly, as if stirred by my words. The notebook slid from my hand before I realized I'd let go. It landed open in the dirt, and the figures stirred. Their heads turned in unison, slow, mechanical, until all of them were staring at the notebook. Not at me. At it. Then one of them rose. He moved stiffly, like his joints hadn't been used in years, but he was steady enough to bend and lift the notebook. His fingers closed around it with reverence. When he straightened, I saw his face clearly. It was the man in the flannel, but his eyes were gone. Two hollow sockets glowed faintly from within, the same dull fire that burned without fuel. "You've come," he said, though his mouth barely moved. His voice was the same one I'd heard in the whispers, calm and measured. I staggered back a step, my knees shook. "What do you want from me?" "You've already given it," he said. "Each word you write, each memory you relive, you carry it further, you keep it alive." I shook my head, voice breaking. "No, you've been inside my head. You made me write. I didn't choose this." He tilted his head like a teacher humoring a child. "You saw the fire. That was choice enough." The notebook glowed in his hands. Flames licked up its spine but didn't consume it, the paper unburned. He extended it toward me. "Finish it," he said. The others rose then, slowly, silently, their chairs tipping back into the dirt. Their faces were blurred by light, their eyes burning, their mouths moving in faint unison, though no sound came. My legs locked. The forest pressed in around me, the air hot despite the mountain night. And for the first time since that night at the campground, I felt true panic. Not dread, not unease. Panic, raw and animal. I turned and ran. Branches whipped against my arms as I barreled into the tree line. Roots caught at my boots. Rocks tore at my ankles, but I didn't stop. My lungs screamed, my chest ached, but still I ran. Behind me, the fire surged. The light pulsed against the trees, brighter with each stride I took. But I didn't look back. I ran until the forest spat me out onto a gravel road. My knees buckled, throwing me to the ground. Blood smeared my palms from the fall, but I forced myself up and stumbled toward the RV. The notebook was already inside. It lay on the driver's seat, perfectly still, waiting. I don't remember climbing in. I don't remember turning the key. All I remember is the highway racing beneath me again, the night swallowing me whole. The notebook glowing faintly in the corner of my vision like a coal refusing to die. And the worst part? I could still hear them. The figures around the fire. The man in the flannel. The countless voices that lived inside the pages, all whispering the same phrase over and over until the words etched themselves into my skull. Finish it. Finish it. Finish it. The notebook hasn't left my side in days. I try to push it into cabinets, hide it beneath blankets, even shove it under the bench seat. But no matter where I place it, I always find it again on the table, open to a fresh page, waiting. I stopped eating much. Sleep comes in sharp fragments. The RV smells like stale coffee and sweat, windows fogged from nights of pacing. Every time I close my eyes, I see them. The circle of RVs, the man in flannel, the others rising, their mouths moving in silence as if rehearsing a prayer. But the real torture isn't the visions. It's the writing. I'll glance down and my hand will already be moving across the page. Words I don't remember forming spill out in jagged script, sentences that sound like mine but aren't mine. Sometimes it's a memory, my first camping trip as a kid, my father showing me how to strike a match. Sometimes it's places I've never seen, an abandoned quarry, a dried riverbed, a desert with a single tree burned to ash. Other times it's instructions. Pull over at the rest stop. Leave the engine running. Don't look at the mirrors when you get back inside. I obey. Every damn time, I obey. The worst was 2 nights ago. I was parked off a service road high in the mountains. Rain had hammered the roof all night, and I thought maybe, just maybe, the sound would drown the whispers. But the notebook opened itself while I slept. The page was scrawled with one sentence over and over as though written by a frantic hand. Burn it. Burn it. Burn it. My chest lifted with hope. That was the answer, wasn't it? Fire had started all of this, and fire could end it. I dragged the notebook out into the rain, gasoline sloshing from the red can I'd been carrying since the first campground. The ground was a soup of mud and pine needles, water running in rivulets down my arms as I doused the book. The match hissed the instant it touched the page. A bright spark, then nothing. I struck another and another. My hands shook, rain soaking through my sleeves, but still I tried. The matches flared, spat, then died. The gasoline pooled and rolled away in oily streams. The notebook was dry. It had never even taken on the rain. I remember screaming. I don't know what I sounded like, part rage, part despair, but the trees swallowed it without echo. I hurled the book into the mud, stomped on it, tore at the binding with both hands. The pages ripped, but when I staggered back into the RV, heart hammering, the notebook was sitting calmly on the table, whole, untouched, waiting. I realized then it wasn't just a book, it wasn't even paper. It was the fire, condensed, and as long as I lived, it wasn't going anywhere. So what does that leave me? A choice. Finish the story, or destroy myself with it. I've been circling the idea for days. At night, I sit with the revolver in my lap, the one I swore I'd only ever keep for emergencies. I clean it, load it, unload it, spin the cylinder like a child spinning a toy. Each time I press it against my temple, I feel the whispers surge as if pressing closer, eager. They don't tell me not to. They just tell me, if you do, someone else will pick it up. And that's the truth, isn't it? If I end here, if I bleed into this filthy mattress, the RV will sit until someone finds it. A ranger, a hiker, a kid looking for shelter. They'll find the notebook waiting on the table just like I did, and the fire will keep spreading. That thought keeps me alive, because if I finish this, if I can bring it to an end, maybe the fire ends with me. Maybe no one else has to carry it. But finishing means telling the rest. Not just the campground, not just the man in flannel, but everything. Every whisper, every vision, every night of terror on the road, everything I've lived through since. It means carving myself open, bleeding the story out until nothing remains of me but ash. The notebook is open now. The page is blank. My pen is warm in my hand, though I haven't touched it for hours. The RV is quiet, except for the rain tapping faintly at the roof. And the fire waits. The rain stopped sometime before dawn, but I didn't notice until the silence pressed in. No patter on the roof, no distant thunder, just the hum of my own breath and the faint ticking of the RV cooling in the damp air. The notebook was still open, the page still blank. I stared at it until my eyes blurred, until the shadows around it seemed to sway like smoke. My mind kept circling the same thought. If the fire wants me to write, maybe the only way to end this is to give it what it asks. Not in pieces, not half-truths. The whole thing poured out until the pen snaps in my hand. But even as I thought it, fear clamped down on my chest. Because what if finishing the story doesn't end it? What if finishing is the very thing that brings it to life completely? I pressed my palms against my temples and whispered to myself like a man trying to calm a wild animal. If it's just a story, then words can't hurt. If it's just words, then maybe words can free me. I picked up the pen, and the first line slid out of me like it had been waiting for years. I wasn't supposed to see the fire. My hand moved fast, scrawling without pause. I wrote about the night at the campground, about the circle of RVs, about the flames rising without fuel. I wrote about the man in flannel, the chanting I could almost hear, but not quite. I wrote about how every face looked familiar in ways I couldn't explain, how every gesture seemed rehearsed, how their silence was louder than any scream. The more I wrote, the heavier the air grew inside the RV. It was like oxygen itself was thinning, each breath scraping my lungs raw. My ears popped, like I'd driven too high into the mountains, and a faint ringing built behind my eyes. Still I wrote. The pen tore across the paper, ink blurring where my hand trembled. My body begged me to stop, shoulders knotted, heart pounding, vision tunneling. But the words came faster, as though my arm was no longer mine. I wrote about the drive that night, the way the highway never seemed to end, the way the mirrors caught glimpses of faces I knew weren't there. I wrote about the rest stops, the whispers, the shadows leaning just outside the circle of light, and as I wrote, I began to smell it. Smoke. Not cigarette smoke. Not wood smoke. Campfire smoke. Thick. Rich. Impossible. I lifted my eyes, half expecting to see flames licking the curtains, but the RV was dark. Still, the smell grew stronger, wrapping around me until I gagged. The air shimmered faintly, like heat rising from asphalt. I bent back over the page. My handwriting was no longer my own. The letters curled sharp, ancient, nothing like English, but still readable in my head. I didn't understand the words, but I understood their weight. Every line burned as it landed, searing into the page as though the paper itself was smoldering. And that's when I heard them. Not whispers this time. Not fragments. Voices. Clear, many of them. Rising together like a chorus, they were speaking the same language my hand was writing. Chanting it, filling the RV with sounds so thick it pressed against my chest like a storm front. I couldn't stop. My hand wouldn't stop. I cried out, half in fear, half in rage, and tried to fling the pen across the room, but my fingers clenched tighter, locked around it like claws. The notebook's pages turned themselves, each one filling with frantic script as the voices swelled. And then, just as suddenly, silence. The pen dropped from my hand, clattering against the table. The notebook closed itself. I sat gasping, drenched in sweat, the smell of smoke still coating my tongue. My chest heaved, but the air felt clear again, the RV still. It was over, or so I thought. Because when I looked up, the window was glowing orange. Not from the sunrise, from fire. I stumbled to the door, flung it open, and froze. Everywhere was fire. Not flames crawling across the ground, not trees alight, just fire, burning in circles, rising from nothing. Dozens of them, stretching across the hillside, each one a perfect ring. And in each ring, figures stood, silent, watching. Some of them I recognized, faces from the campground, faces from rest stops, faces I'd passed on highways, people who'd waved at me from their own RVs, and some faces, God help me, looked like people I'd known long before this ever began. Neighbors, a cousin, a teacher, all of them standing in the fire, untouched, eyes fixed on me. I staggered backward, slammed the door, pressed my back against it. My heart was battering my ribs, my throat raw with the scream I hadn't let out. The notebook sat calmly on the table, waiting, and I realized with bone-deep certainty that this wasn't the end. This was only the invitation. I pressed harder against the RV door, my palms slick, my whole body shaking. But I knew deep down what I didn't want to admit. No lock, no steel, no distance would keep them out. Not when the fire itself had followed me across states, across nights, into the marrow of my own mind. The glow outside the window pulsed brighter with every second, like the rings of fire were breathing. Every breath they took, I felt in my chest as though my lungs no longer belonged to me. I whispered, "Why me?" The silence answered. And then, like a shiver cutting through the dark, a memory surfaced. That first night at the campground when I saw the man in flannel lean forward toward the flames, when his lips moved but no sound came. I'd convinced myself it was a trick of distance or my imagination filling gaps. But no, he had been speaking, and I had been chosen to hear. The fire doesn't need wood. It doesn't need wind. It doesn't need air. It needs witnesses. My legs carried me before my mind caught up. I opened the door, stepped into the damp grass, the smell of wet earth beneath the overwhelming sting of smoke that wasn't there. My bare feet sank slightly into the mud, grounding me and unmooring me all at once. The hillside was alive with rings of flame. They burned without heat, without smoke, just a perfect geometry of light and shadow. And in every circle, the figures stood taller now, their eyes catching mine with unblinking intensity. One voice rose above the silence, not spoken, not heard. Inside me. Finish it. My head throbbed. My body wanted to collapse, but the words dragged me forward. I stumbled toward the nearest ring, my pulse beating faster than my steps. The figures didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. The fire licked upward, but it never touched me. I crossed into the circle. The ground inside was dry, brittle, like a desert floor, though only moments ago it had been soaked with rain. The air felt thinner, sharper, as though every breath scraped me raw. And the voices, dear God, the voices swelled again. I clutched my head, tears stinging my eyes. I wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but my chest heaved with the one truth I could no longer escape. This was never about watching. This was never about surviving. This was about becoming. The circle of faces leaned forward as one, shadows stretching grotesque across the dirt. Their mouths opened in unison, and though I couldn't see flame inside, I knew it was there. And the fire inside me, whatever seed they'd planted in my gut that night at the campground, ignited. I fell to my knees, clawing at the earth, the soil crumbling like ash beneath my nails. My body convulsed as heat spread through me, not burning, not scalding, consuming, the same way the fire consumed nothing, yet left nothing untouched. My mouth opened, and sound poured out. Not my language, not theirs. Something older, heavier, rolling through me like molten rock. The circle swayed with me. Their chant rose higher, their voices echoing mine, or maybe mine echoing theirs. I couldn't tell anymore, and in the center of that ring the air split. A column of flame shot upward, straight into the sky, and the night bent around it like fabric warping from heat. The stars themselves seemed to twist and ripple. I should have been terrified. God forgive me. I felt whole. For the first time in years, the hollow ache in my chest, the wandering, the endless searching for a place to belong, it quieted. I belonged. I belonged here. The chant thundered in my skull, my own voice now indistinguishable from the others. My eyes blurred, tears streaming not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of recognition. This was never about danger. This was initiation. And the fire had chosen me. I don't remember falling. I don't remember closing my eyes. I only remember waking hours later, or maybe days, inside the RV. The notebook lay open on the table, every page filled to the edges in that impossible script. My hand was blistered, my knuckles raw, as if I'd been writing without end. Outside the world was quiet, no fire, no voices, just damp earth and the scent of pine. I drove away at dawn, the road slick with mist, my reflection pale in the glass. I didn't look back at the campsite. I didn't have to, because the fire came with me. I see it now at the edge of highways, flickering in rest stops, glowing faintly in the eyes of strangers. I hear the chant in the hum of tires, in the whisper of the wind across my roof. And when I stop at new campgrounds, sometimes I recognize the faces of those standing by their fires. And sometimes they recognize me. I don't camp for peace anymore. I don't camp to escape. I camp because I must, because the fire spreads by witness and my presence is both curse and calling. If you see me at a campground, if you notice my RV parked beside yours, if you glance out your window late at night and see the faint glow of a flame that burns without fuel, know this: it isn't my fire you're seeing, it's yours too. And once you've seen it, you'll never unsee it. The silence will never be whole again. The fire doesn't forget, and neither will you. The Harbor of Blackwater. I worked as a customs officer in the port of Savannah for 9 years. It wasn't glamorous work. Most days were the same. Paperwork, container numbers, cross-checking manifests, the steady salt stink of the marsh rolling in with the tides. But there's something about the port, its sheer size, its relentless churn of cargo, that makes you feel small, like a pawn in a larger game no one's really explaining. Every now and then, something comes through that doesn't sit right. Smuggled ivory carved into chess pieces, crates of rotting fruit swarming with flies, counterfeit electronics with wires already corroded by seawater. Things that should never have left their origin country, but somehow found their way across the ocean to our docks. You learn to trust your gut. The paperwork never tells the whole story. The night that stays with me began on a Thursday, late summer. Savannah's heat doesn't ease up after dark. It lingers, clings to your skin, heavier at the water's edge. I was pulling an overtime shift, covering for a colleague whose wife had gone into labor. I remember the air as thick and wet, the river surface shining like black glass under the cranes. The cargo ship in question, the Krios Star, was supposed to dock at sunrise, but it came in hours early, around 3 in the morning. I was on pier rotation, clipboard in hand, when I first saw it emerge from the mist downriver. Its running lights flickered strangely like the power was failing on board. At first, I thought I was just tired, but as the freighter drew closer, I noticed something that made me stop writing mid-sentence. The water trailing behind the ship wasn't the usual churn of white wake. It was black, thick and glistening like oil slick, stretching in a wide ribbon downriver. I frowned, lifted my radio, and called in. "Control, this is Pier 6. Vessel Krios Star approaching. You seeing that discharge?" Static. Just static. I tried again, a little sharper. "Control, confirm comms." Nothing. The silence unsettled me more than the ship itself. The port's radios never went fully dead. Even interference came with bursts of broken voices. But this was absolute, like someone had cut the line between my mouth and the world. The freighter eased up against the pier. That's when I saw the first fish. Silver bellies floated to the surface, drifting into the dock lights. Dozens of them, then hundreds, lifeless and shining. Their scales were darkened in patches, eaten away as if dipped in acid. And still the black slick poured off the hull, bubbling up around the ship's waterline, heavier than the tide itself. A boarding call had already been logged. I had no choice but to climb. The crew met me at the gangway. 15 men, all in matching gray coveralls, their expressions slack and oddly calm. Their skin looked too pale for men who'd been at sea, like they hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. I asked for the captain. A tall man with hollow cheeks stepped forward. He introduced himself as Captain Havel. His voice was steady, practiced. "You'll find our manifest in order, officer," he said, handing me a sheaf of papers already damp with condensation. Nothing unusual, standard cargo, dry goods. I flipped through the paperwork. Nothing out of line. Bolts of fabric, crates of canned vegetables, industrial adhesives. But I wasn't looking at the manifest. I was looking at the man's eyes. They didn't blink normally, too long between closures, and when his lids did drop, they snapped shut too tight, too fast. Behind him, the crew just stood there, perfectly still, no shifting feet, no nervous scratching, too still. I gestured toward the river. "You've got discharge from the hull. Black liquid. It's killed fish from here to the channel. What's in your tanks?" The captain's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Nothing. Ballast water only." "That's not ballast. You need to explain that slick." His voice didn't change tone, didn't even rise. "There is nothing wrong with this vessel." The way he said it, flat, unwavering, like a line memorized, set my teeth on edge. I wrote a note on my clipboard, more to steady my hand than anything else. "I'll need to inspect the cargo hold." For the first time, the crew moved. In perfect unison, they stepped back, clearing the gangway behind their captain. Their boots clanged against the metal in rhythm, the sound echoing down the steel corridors of the ship. The interior smelled wrong. Not the usual diesel and mildew, but a sharper stench that bit at the back of the throat, chemical, metallic, and yet somehow organic, like blood left in the sun. I clicked on my flashlight and descended. Condensation dripped from overhead pipes. My boots stuck slightly to the metal grates, tacky as though coated in a thin film. When I lifted one foot, a faint strand of black liquid stretched and broke. The first hold I inspected matched the manifest. Rows of neatly stacked crates marked with standard shipping labels. I opened one. Canned corn, just like the papers said. But the cans were slick with that same black sheen, as if something had seeped into the packing straw. I tried my radio again. Static. That's when I heard it. Faint at first, a rhythmic tapping coming from deeper in the ship. Not metal against metal, more like knuckles rapping wood. Slow. Deliberate. I followed. The second hold was darker, the lights overhead flickering weakly. I swept my beam across the crates, more of the same labels. But here the tapping grew louder, more insistent. Not frantic, just steady. When I reached the far corner, I froze. One crate was moving, not rocking from the ship's motion, moving, sliding inch by inch across the floor, leaving behind a dark smear. I approached, heart pounding. My hand hovered over the latch, then the captain's voice came from behind me. "Officer, that's not for you." I spun, flashlight slicing the dark. He was standing perfectly still at the hold entrance, hands clasped loosely behind his back. His crew filled the corridor behind him, all silent, all watching. I swallowed hard. "What's in this crate?" "Cargo," he said evenly, "as the manifest states." The tapping stopped. When I turned back, the crate was still. I backed away, every instinct screaming at me to get off that ship. But procedure kept me moving. I told myself I needed evidence, a sample of that black slick, something solid to file. Without proof, my word was nothing. So I pulled a swab kit from my pocket and dipped it against the deck where the liquid had pooled. It clung unnaturally to the cotton, refusing to bead or soak in. When I held it up to the light, it shimmered faintly, like a heat mirage. That's when my flashlight sputtered and died. The darkness was absolute, and in that dark, I heard them, 15 sets of boots stepping forward in perfect unison, their rhythm matching the pulse of the river outside. I backed against the crate. My breath came fast, ragged. Then, impossibly, the tapping resumed. But not from inside the box. From the walls, from the ceiling, from every surface of the hold, surrounding me. I snapped my flashlight back on, my hands slick with sweat. The beam wavered. The captain and crew hadn't moved. They stood frozen, eyes fixed on me. But the black liquid, it was rising, seeping up from the grates, crawling over the deck plates, swallowing the edges of the room. It didn't flow like water. It pulsed, contracted, spread again. I bolted. I don't remember climbing the ladder, only the burn in my thighs and the taste of copper in my mouth. When I stumbled onto the deck, the night air hit me like a slap. I ran down the gangway, nearly dropping my clipboard into the river. On the pier, the air felt thicker, heavier. The water around the hull had gone completely black, opaque as tar. Fish continued to float belly up, but now some twitched faintly, convulsing as if half alive. Their gills pumped once, twice, then fell still again. I tried the radio one more time. This time it crackled, a burst of voices fragmented. "Officer? Reading you now?" I pressed the transmit button hard enough to hurt my thumb. "This is Pier 6, urgent inspection order. Vessel Krios Star is leaking hazardous material into the river. Send backup immediately." Static again. Then silence. When I turned back toward the ship, the crew was lined along the rail, all 15 men, standing shoulder to shoulder, watching me. The captain raised one hand slowly, palm outward like a gesture of reassurance or warning. "There is nothing wrong with this vessel," he called, voice carrying eerily clear across the water. I didn't believe him, but I also couldn't move. Something about the way the black water lapped against the pier, too regular, too synchronized, held me rooted. It pulsed in time with my heartbeat. With each breath, I swore the smell of iron and salt grew stronger. And then, just as suddenly, the lights of the ship went out. That night never left me. Even now, years later, I dream of the way the river looked under those dead floodlights, an expanse of black, swallowing every ripple, every reflection, like the harbor itself had opened into something deeper. I never saw the Krios Star leave. The next morning, the pier was empty. The water was clear, and no record of that ship exists in the port logs. But sometimes, when the tide goes slack and the wind dies down, I still catch a faint metallic taste in the air, a smell that clings to my throat, and I wonder if somewhere out there that slick is still moving, waiting to surface again. I didn't sleep that morning. Not after watching an entire freighter vanish from a secured berth with no trace. I filed my report anyway, out of sheer desperation to anchor what I'd seen into reality. I logged the discharge, the dead fish, the failure of communications, and the irregular behavior of the crew. I attached my swab sample, though it was no longer the shimmering black I had collected. When I pulled it out in the fluorescent light of the inspection lab, the cotton was bone white, clean, dry, like it had never touched a drop. The clerk behind the glass gave me a look that said, "You're wasting my time," and slid the evidence bag back toward me. "There's nothing here," he said flatly. I pushed the bag back at him. It was there. It was But the words stuck. What could I say? That the water had pulsed like a living thing? That the crew spoke in memorized lines? That a ship had disappeared overnight, leaving no record? It already sounded like madness. The clerk shrugged and tossed the empty bag in the disposal bin. Write it up as fatigue, long shifts, heat exhaustion. Happens to everyone out here. I left without answering. For weeks, I tried to convince myself of the same thing, that I was tired, sunburnt, hallucinating from the fumes of diesel and stagnant tidewater. But the harder I pushed those thoughts down, the more I noticed the small reminders. A gull washed ashore near my apartment. Its feathers were matted with a black film that wouldn't come off, even under running water. The bird's eyes were open, but they were empty. Not clouded, just hollow. A fisherman at the bar on River Street told me his catch had been coming up strange. Half rotted, he muttered, fingers tapping the wood nervously. Like they'd been dead before I pulled them in. He wouldn't meet my eyes. And then there was the ship log. Every vessel that enters the harbor leaves a trace. Clearance forms, inspection records, mooring assignments. But when I searched the database for the Creos Star, the entry blinked red. No results found. Not missing. Not corrupted, as if it had never been entered. I asked one of the clerks about it. He frowned, typed a few commands, and shook his head. Never had a ship by that name. But I had the paperwork in my locker. Damp, smeared, but real. I checked it a dozen times, ran my fingers over the embossed seal. I even traced the captain's signature, jagged and precise. Still, the system said no. One night, about a month later, I drove back to the pier. Off shift, no clearance, just me and the chain link fence. The marsh hummed with cicadas, the smell of brine heavy in the air. I parked under a dead light post and climbed the fence, scraping my palms on the wire. The dock looked the same as always. Cranes stood still, floodlights flickering on the water. The channel stretched wide and black. I walked to the end of Pier 6, clipboard in hand like a talisman. My boots echoed hollow against the boards, and then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Soft, deliberate, rising from the water below. I leaned over the railing, my breath caught. The surface was rippling, not with tide or wind, but with rhythm. The same pulse I had felt that night. Expanding, contracting, a heartbeat in the harbor. Something pale floated up with the swell. At first I thought it was driftwood. Then it rolled. A human hand, slick with black sheen, fingers half curled as though reaching. I staggered back, clipboard clattering against the deck. The hand sank without a sound, leaving the water glass smooth again. The next morning, I tried once more to file. I spoke with my supervisor, a man who had seen everything from drug seizures to body recoveries. His expression hardened as I explained. "You're tired," he said finally. "Take a week. Clear your head." "That ship was real," I snapped. "I boarded it. I spoke to the captain. I have his signature." He held up a hand. "Drop it." "Why?" His eyes flicked to the office door, then back. "Because sometimes cargo comes through this port that isn't meant for us to question. You understand?" It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. I left before I said something that would get me fired. But the silence of obedience didn't help. If anything, it made the harbor louder. Every time I stood on the pier, I could hear it. Beneath the cranes, beneath the gulls, beneath the hum of engines. That faint, pulsing rhythm, like a second tide moving under the surface. One evening, I found myself parked along the riverfront again. I sat in my car with the windows rolled down, staring at the channel. The tide was slack, the water still, and then the surface shimmered. A line of bubbles rose in a perfect arc, stretching from the far bank to the pier. Fish broke the surface belly up, twitching faintly before going still. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached, because I knew what would come next. The lights. One by one, the flood lamps along the pier sputtered and died, plunging the dock into darkness. When my eyes adjusted, I saw them. Figures lining the rail where no ship was moored. 15 of them, standing shoulder to shoulder, watching. And the voice carried across the water, steady as ever. "There is nothing wrong with this vessel." I couldn't breathe. My chest locked tight, every nerve screaming to run. But I stayed frozen, eyes locked on the empty pier. The figures didn't move, but the water did. It surged up against the pilings higher than the tide should have carried it. Black, glistening, thick as tar. It climbed in jerks, like hands pulling it upward. My headlights flickered. The engine coughed. Then the car died, silent but for the rhythmic pulse of the water. I sat there in the dark, the taste of iron thick in my mouth as the harbor rose. And in that moment I understood. The Krios star hadn't vanished. The harbor had taken it, and it was hungry still. I did not tell anyone what I saw that night on the riverfront. Not my supervisor, not my colleagues, not even my brother who lived 2 hours inland. Every instinct screamed at me to keep quiet, to put the memory in a box and nail it shut. But silence is its own kind of weight. You carry it in your bones until every step feels like you're sinking into mud. For weeks, I went through the motions at work, clipboard in hand, stamping forms, pretending I didn't taste iron every time I breathed near the water. Ships came and went. Tankers, freighters, barges, heavy with coal. None of them bore the name Krios Star. None of them trailed the black slick. But the harbor remembered. I could feel it in the way the tides shifted under the piers, slower than they should, as though some greater body moved beneath. One evening I broke. It was the end of October, the air finally cooler, the marsh grass rustling in the wind. I walked down to the water at low tide, past the pilings caked with barnacles. The smell of brine hit me harder than usual, stronger, sharper. I crouched and let my flashlight skim the surface. The beam caught on something, an object tangled in reeds at the shoreline. At first I thought it was driftwood. Then I saw the shape of it, a boot. I waded in, water sucking at my ankles, and pulled it free. The leather was bloated, the laces stiff, but inside was a foot, not bone, not clean. A human foot, the skin waxy and pale, as if it had been soaked too long in chemicals. The flesh had dark patches, eaten away in circles, as if something had fed in measured bites. My stomach heaved, bile rising, but I couldn't let go. Because pressed against the insole, half washed away by the tide, was a stamp, Krios Star. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hand rising from the water, the 15 figures along the rail, the captain's voice echoing over black tide. I sat at my kitchen table with the boot in a garbage bag, staring at it like it might speak. By dawn, I'd made my decision. If the harbor held answers, I would find them. I drove back to Pier 6 with my badge clipped high and my jaw set. The security guard barely looked up as I passed. The water was calm, too calm. I stood at the rail where I had seen the figures and waited. My heart thudded loud enough I swore it would draw attention. The tide slid in slow, lapping against the pilings, and then there. A shimmer. A distortion in the reflection of the cranes, like heat rising from asphalt. The air grew heavier, the metallic tang sharp in my throat. I leaned closer. Something was moving beneath the surface. Not fish, not tide. Something larger, a mass, shifting. It brushed the underside of the dock, rattling the boards beneath my boots. The smell grew stronger. My eyes watered. My hand tightened on the rail. And then it surfaced. Not fully, just enough. The water bulged upwards, slick and black, breaking into shapes that weren't quite solid. I saw edges of crates, the suggestion of hull plating, the curve of a prow, like the ship itself was trying to rise, but the water refused to let it go. And in the swell I saw faces, pressed against the surface like glass, pale and distorted, mouths opening soundlessly, eyes wide with something between plea and command. 15 of them, the captain among them. His lips moved, and though no sound carried across the water, I heard the words in my chest vibrating in rhythm with the pulse of the tide. There is nothing wrong with this vessel. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the coil of a rope. My clipboard fell with a clang, but I didn't pick it up. The swell subsided. The water flattened. The smell eased. Only the faintest trace of bubbles remained, winking out one by one until the harbor looked as it always had, black, silent, harmless. But I knew better. I didn't go home that night. I drove until the marshlands gave way to pine, until the scent of salt lifted from the air. I slept in my car at a rest stop 200 miles inland. When I returned days later, The boot was gone. So was my clipboard. My locker at work had been emptied, my papers missing. No one admitted to touching them. My supervisor called me into his office. He didn't sit. He stood by the window watching the river. "Take more leave," he said. His voice was clipped, final, effective immediately. I started to argue, but he turned then. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale, and in that moment I realized something terrifying. He could smell it too. I left Savannah within the week, packed my apartment, broke my lease, drove inland with the windows down to flush the harbor air from my lungs. But distance doesn't silence memory. Some nights I wake choking on a metallic taste that no water can rinse away. Some nights I hear tapping in the walls of my house, steady, deliberate, like knuckles against wood. And last month at a reservoir 2 states away, I saw fish floating belly up, their scales eaten in neat circles. There are whispers, if you know where to listen, of rivers closing unexpectedly, of lakes where no life thrives, of cargo manifests sealed and erased. I believe the harbor took the Creos star, and I believe it has learned to spread. The water carries things farther than anyone imagines. So if you stand by a river and catch a whiff of iron, if your radio goes to static, if you hear tapping in the dark, don't lean closer, don't breathe too deep. And for God's sake, don't believe anyone who tells you there's nothing wrong, because the water remembers and is waiting.